thank you for choosing this as your breakout. You had choices and we're happy you're here. So for those of you who were here last year, thank you for the feedback. And if you've been to my earlier accelerators, you would have heard some of the things that we kind of are foreshadowing to present today. One of those things were the accelerator events. We've already done those in 2024. But the other things we promised were we're going to have more tools. And then we're going to hire a very experienced person that's going to help drive this practice. I brought it to where it got, but it wouldn't go to where it needs to go. And so we decided on hiring somebody that's going to bring the practice somewhere further than I ever could take it. And I'm so grateful that we made that decision. She's been a godsend for me, right? I mean, ultimately, we've been synergizing, and it's so nice to have somebody to bounce things off of instead of having to kind of invent things and try to learn things all the time by myself. So it's always nicer to do things with people, especially someone like Melanie Thomas. Amazing. So I've been told, because I'm kind of handing off the baton, that I only get 5 to 10 minutes. So I gotta rush through this, because more of it is about the tools and the practice, the way that she's developing it, right? So let me get started. There she is, beautiful Melanie. You even has a better face than me, so. Why security is in focus, right? So really, the goal of cybersecurity, if you've been to my accelerator, it's kind of a repeat, but I have to kind of go through it. The justification of why security is relevant today. It's really trying to guard against availability, confidentiality, and integrity, right? So they call that the CIA triad, right? Confidentiality is making sure that the right people who are supposed to see those resources get those resources, nobody else, right? So that's where the confidentiality kind of plays into. So it's like your identity and access management, things like that kind of help protect against that, right? Integrity is, making sure whatever you have as your data sources are not being changed in any form, shape, or form, right? So you're trying to keep and preserve the data as it was meant for. So people get in, affect confidentiality, and then they play around with some of the data that you have, and you don't want that. And availability is the last one, right? And that's really, think about DDoS and things like that, right? So you want to have the resources you need available to you at all times. If not, then there's a lot of soft costs associated with that, right, for businesses. So Verizon comes out with this publication. I've told you this before, and it's not, it's a very team sport oriented, so all partners kind of look at this as well as the others. There's many others, but this is the one that I learned on, so I pretty much like it, because just like insurance, we don't have a crystal ball, right? Do we need a speaker? Can you not hear me in the back, Mr. Kinko? Sorry, can you hear me better? So ultimately, what I like about the DBIR is that's the historical things that happened the year previous, right? So it gives you some indication of what the current vectors of attack are, and then you can help yourself by kind of guarding against it by putting controls against it. So for example, 14%, what do they mean by that? 14% of all the breaches came via vulnerabilities, right? And vulnerabilities is unpatched, previous versions that are insecure, and that's a vector that a lot of the bad guys are kind of coming through. There's a stat line, there's a 180% increase year over year. So 14% doesn't seem a lot, but 180% increase year over year. So that's a path that a lot of them are coming through. That's why people are doing vulnerability scans and things like that, just to kind of see what's kind of open, right? That's the open doors, open windows. Down here, 62% financially motivated incidents involve ransomware or extortion. And there's a distinction between the two. So ransomware used to be the one, right? They just kind of encrypt your data, and then they charge you a ransom so that you can get availability of that, right, to your data. But it's kind of pivoted a little bit, because cyber criminals are smart too, and they found out people were trying to do some of those cyber resilience kind of programs that kind of thwarted that a little bit. So what do now? And they tend to do what's called extortion. Extortion is they just grab a copy. They don't even have to, encrypt your stuff, right? And then it's that name and shame game. So we have your PII, and if you don't pay us, we're gonna put that stuff in the dark web and tell everybody it's available. You're gonna look kind of dumb, and the soft cost of your brand reputation is gonna get you, right? So that's the kind of stuff that's happening there. 68% is still human. So that's why they're still pushing and harping on a lot of phishing simulation, employee awareness, things like that, because it's the human, right? And AI is not helping that. In the past, it was pretty easy to kind of identify what was kind of phishing emails because they spelled things wrong, grammatics were horrible. But they got to a point where things look so real, and they're fooling a lot more people. So ultimately, humans still need to get a little bit better because we're the big vector, right? So we've got to start becoming the human firewall to some degree, and again, awareness helps that. 15% of the breaches involve the third party or supplier. This is a big one. This is a new one that the DBIR just came out with. They haven't really measured that in the past, but if you look at a lot of the things that are happening today, especially in software, right? Software eats the world. Every one of your customers uses software to get business enablement and make things better. But what enables you also can imperil you. So people are starting to now think about the third party risk that exists, and the veil of trust is gone, right? You used to think that third party was huge, so they must be secure. But if unchecked, people cut corners, right? And so there's always those gaps. And your third party, your partners, they could have their partners. So how many third parties are behind that, right? So things are coming up in this day and age, and more scrutiny is going to be kind of held to everybody in that regard, right? In terms of, you might not be in a regulated business, but now you're going to have to kind of understand a little bit of the security efficacy of who you're working with. This is a stat from the cost of the breach, right? So basically, 4.88 million was the average cost of a data breach in 2023. So they don't have 2024 stats yet because, that's a previous year, kind of like I said, it's a backwards vision. That's increased year over year for a while.
Do they have that broken down by like SMB, mid-market?
They absolutely do, but I was told I had too many slides and I gotta get through this pretty quick, so we got rid of it. I always boil the ocean, that's the problem, and you'll see why in a couple of slides. So what we wanted to put in here also was seeing both sides of it, right? Factors that reduce the average breach costs if you have these types of controls. So even if you got a breach, if you had these things that actually sped up some of the incident response and recovery parts of it, right? So you're going to see a lot of these things here are the core services that Melanie's going to describe to you guys in a few slides. Where's the reverse? Well, there was another slide that showed you the factors that make it slower, right? So anyway, this is the last slide that I'm going to kind of talk through, but ultimately, this is why your clients are buying. Oftentimes we're telling the story, right, and telling them you can't buy insurance after the accident. They still don't listen. So a lot of times they have to learn via, their own breaches, or sometimes their customers breach, or sometimes, like I said, that third-party risk is starting to get more compliance requirements, and compliance in general is just getting more robust. It's not going to go backwards, so it's getting more rigor behind it. You have to disclose. So there's a lot more punitive, and the environment of yesterday is no longer. So a lot of people now are trying to do more from a risk-based approach and quantifying risk, right? And so I think that's what's really nice for all of us, is because that's really what we do, is not just outcomes, but the context of the outcomes. So we can really help people, buy intelligently and, appropriately. This is that slide that's really ugly and explains to you why you need to have context. Otherwise, they'll go through all these partners only to find out they found the wrong one, right? So that's why it's so important to understand not just the tool, it's people in process. Without those three things, it's very difficult to find out which one actually, fits the solution you're trying to leverage. Here's the mind map that everybody goes through. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of why, we ask so many questions, right? And ultimately, this is why it's so nuanced, and it's just not so black and white, because you can see how this thing is all interconnected and interrelated, and how each concept, can kind of branch to another, right? And so that's why when I'm on the call, I know I sound like a blowhard sometimes, But it's important to ask those questions because it gives you the perspective as to which partner is going to be the one that's most fitting. So it allows us to kind of show to our clients our value really is in the efficiency mapping of the solution to the outcome that they want based on what they have in terms of people and how they want to consume things. It's 5 minutes.
All right, so one of the things that is super fun about cybersecurity, but also scary at the same time, it's super complicated, right? So there are hundreds of technologies, there's thousands of vendors, everyone does it a little bit differently. And like the big scary slide, right, it can go all over the place. The mind map, when someone says, hey, I have a customer that wants to talk about cybersecurity, our brains go in 10 different directions, right? This could be a lot of different things, it could be a combination of things, and all of that's okay, but we're gonna ask a million questions, right? If you don't know those answers, those questions, if you don't know what questions to ask, that's absolutely okay. That's what we're here for. But we're gonna give you kind of an idea about how we're starting to structure cybersecurity, what it looks like as we're looking at these solutions. So what we're doing here is we're going to review some terms. It's kind of like, everyone knows here I teach, right? So it's kind of like going through a 101 a little bit, but it's gonna give you some insight into how we're going to start organizing what it looks like at Bridgepointe, right? We have access to probably just about all of those vendors right now. We're finding gaps because of this process as well. And all this is gonna help us lead to faster conversations, more specific conversations, and then ultimately, right, having to go to, scope to contract faster and helping us make sure that we really are suggesting the best solution because each customer is a little bit different. So we're gonna go through a couple of common terms. If these are familiar to you, wonderful. If they're not, that's okay. This is also one of the first of many trainings we're gonna do specific to cybersecurity so that everyone starts to get more and more comfortable as we keep going. So some fundamental technology terms. I'm gonna go down here, if that's okay. I'm super short. You guys aren't watching me anyway. ZTNA, defense in depth. One of the fun things about this, it probably sounds like a very common term for those of you who use a lot of networking, a lot of SASE and all those fun things. ZTNA, one of my fun things I will talk about this, it is not a product. So some people will say, oh, we have ZTNA. And I'm like, no, it's not really a product. It's more like a mindset, it's an approach, right? Zero trust. That's awesome. That sounds very secure. That sounds very cool. Same thing with defense in depth, right? That sounds really awesome. Yeah, we want to do that. Of course we want to do that. Not a product. It's a very wide solution of things, and it could be a number of processes and people and technologies, right? SOC, Security Operations Center. This is humans, right? Analysts, operators watching things and responding for security purposes. M, all those things, right? If anything cybersecurity is guaranteed, there's an acronym for everything, and sometimes those acronyms are different depending on the context of that conversation. So M would be typically managed, right? So we're going to talk about MSSP, Managed Security Service Provider. MSP, MSOC could be one, MDR, right? Manage, detect, and respond. So, a lot of acronyms, and we're going to make this a little bit easier as we go too. We'll put links and glossaries and all kinds of very good things. IR or DEFR, these are two separate things. So incident response, IR, breach happens, compromise happens, someone's responding to that incident, active nature happens, that's also a thing, right? Lots of hurricanes this year, data centers can go down, that's still an incident. The DF part of that is digital forensics. So when you hire an IR firm, they might not actually do forensics. They might just help you with an initial response. You might have to pay 10 times more than that for someone to actually go really deep into laptops. You're pulling tapes, you're shipping drives to someone in FedEx, right? It's a whole different process depending on how severe that breach is. EDR, endpoint, privacy, everyone knows what privacy is. Hopefully that's gonna be a much larger piece of conversations. Lots of security around privacy and the regulations that go into that. And then of course, identity. Identity is different than identify. So identity is your user, right? And the different ways that your user can be inside of or have access to different pieces of technology, different parts of your system, right? So there's different ways that we consider these words in the context of security than you might have in some other areas of technology. Compliance is one of my favorite subjects, and I will nerd out about this all day. When we look at compliance, what it really is, the practice of ensuring that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Each business has different policies and procedures. So it works for, let's say, a hospital, right, is completely different than work for a university. And the regulations and frameworks and standards, all those great things, are going to be different. So we talk about, oh, they need help in compliance. Cool. We have like 20 at least questions whenever we want to talk about compliance. And again, we have all of these in different contexts. The legal terms. A lot of times, especially in incident response, we're going to be very, very specific with the words that we use because all of these words will matter. So we're going to go from left to right, and we're going to go from high level, yeah, hopefully they have this, to on the right, they have to have this. These are also really good business driving conversations, right? So we talk about frameworks on the left. These are going to be methodologies, best practices, kind of high level, how we're going to look at structuring conversations around our environment. Examples of this are NIST CSF, which we'll talk about a lot here in a minute. CIS Top 18, High Trust. These are frameworks that help people understand what they have, what they don't have, helps you identify gaps, so on. Standards, a little bit more specific, and it's still not going to be prescriptive, right? No one's going to say you have to have Palo Alto firewall that has XYZ blades on it configured this way. That's prescriptive. That's not going to be a standard. It's going to be like, you have to have a firewall. You have to have IPS. Like, cool. And those are still important. Obligations. SOC 2 Type 2, probably pretty familiar. This usually comes up a lot in technology when people provide services or platforms for other people. That's just an obligation. That's between two different people. It's a contractual obligation that, hey, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and I have someone come and certify me to prove to you, my customer, that I'm doing what I say I'm doing with your data, with your access, what have you. So it's a contractual obligation. Regulations are where boards really care about it, executives really care about it. So these are things that the government, usually this one doing it, right, is going to say you have to comply with this. So this is our HIPAA, GDPR, privacy frameworks, regulations, privacy regulations. You have to comply with this. Money has to be spent, technology and process has to go into this, or you get fined. Or your CEO goes to jail to breach, things like that. So it speaks a lot to business drivers, kind of how we structure some of these conversations and suggestions. Complicated, right? A lot goes into this. Lots of different terms, lots of different ways to do it, and all of it matters, right? So we look at it from the Bridgepointe point of view, and we have a lot of conversations about this as we're trying to structure this, is that, yes, we have all these, we have hundreds of vendors, we have lots of different solutions we can look at. Well, it matters, right? Like, oh, we can do EDR. Lots of people do EDR. How do they do EDR? When a customer says, I want to do specifically SentinelOne, but I want licenses right now, maybe I want it managed later. It's a long time to kind of dig through some of that, right? Talking about structuring all of that out and then create a tool to make it effective and quick, right, to find that kind of information. So starting with that, we're going to start with standard. How are we all going to have the same language, the same approach when we look at these solutions and finding these solutions? So we chose the NIST CSF, so the cybersecurity framework. This is V2, so newer, right? But this helps us to categorize solutions and say, hey, I have everything I want in identity, we don't have anything to respond. Right? Again, trying to find gaps, trying to help things get a little bit more structured. This might be familiar to some people. You may have seen this before. It's cyber defense matrix. What this helps us do is understand on the top row, we have govern, is a high baseline for everything. Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. These are our main functions of the CSF. On the right side, on your left side, you have all the different ways that you want to protect an environment. So devices, you look at those solutions differently for devices than for your actual network, or when it goes in to protect data itself. And so to look at this across the left and the right of this matrix, some of these cross, right? Some of these are going to be detect and respond. And so we started digging through that, we're like, no. We have to pick something, we have to stop somewhere. We're going to categorize what makes the most sense, knowing that some of these will cross over. Increasingly, as technologies get Pac-Man absorbed into other platforms, it's going to be even more complicated because everyone wants to be able to do all of these things. Everyone's investing in security. Everyone will have a roadmap item for security in their budget every year. What we did. So functions, right, there's 6 functions. With these 6 functions, they all have categories and subcategories. So what we started to do is say, okay, well, great, right? We have all these different vendors. How do we map this across? So we started doing is we started identifying solutions and where those solutions fit into pieces of this framework. So when we look at detect, for example, SOC as a service, threat hunting as a service, dark web monitoring, that's all helping us detect if something bad is happening in our network. We have things like identity. We're gonna look at asset management tools, asset management tools, AppSec assessments, vulnerability patch management, scanning. These are things that are helping us just identify what's in our network. How do we know what to protect if we don't know what we have, right? So as we look at this, like that's still super complicated, right? We're thinking, how do we talk to someone who's doing this for the first time, who doesn't ever want to get into a security conversation, wants to avoid them at all costs because they're complicated and you're going to get in deep, right? We picked what I like to refer to as our Sweet 16. So we look at solutions. What are solutions that everybody should have, right? If you're going up, you're not a very mature cybersecurity program, how do we get through that all the way to a super mature? If you're super mature, are you missing any of the fundamentals, right? You just go for the super shiny right away, but you're missing something important. And so what we decided to do is we're gonna take this as our first version of kind of launching this into our framework, and we're gonna go deep into each of these categories and start training and start having everybody really understand at a minimum what our Sweet 16 are before we get into the super shiny, super cool stuff. Starting with detect, actually before I get this, the sizing of this also matters. So we look at what people are buying and what people are implementing. The bigger the box, right? Detect is huge, protect is huge. Everyone's spending there, everyone's investing there and continuing to invest there, right? It's a lot of money in those solutions. And even though govern, we know, touches all of these things, not a lot of people always want to spend a lot on vCISO services or GRC tools. It's not the super shiny, sexy stuff, but it's absolutely required, so it's still part of the conversation. Detect. What we're looking at here, these are just examples, right? We don't want to overwhelm anybody. This isn't meant to be all-inclusive, just to give us a little idea as we go into it. So detect SIM, a handful of SIM solutions. As we look at this, and we're starting to frame this and matrix this into Salesforce, into the matrix. So the security dynamic matrices.
No, let me say what SIM is, just real quick.
Mhm.
Say what SIM
Oh,
is.
SIM is
Yeah.
Security Information Event Management. So it's a platform where you're going to load all of your logs, and that's going to be holding kind of like an aggregator of logs, and it's going to help you identify, put correlation rules in there and all this great stuff. So tell you where your abnormalities are, where your threats probably are, and so this is where humans can no longer do this themselves, right? Humans cannot stare at logs and identify abnormalities. Technologies have to happen, right? So, yes, thank you so much. It's the difference between a SIM and an XDR platform. So a SIM is the underlying technology. XDR is usually where you have cooler, shinier stuff. So you have that extended detect and respond, XDR, extended detect and respond kind of functionality. So these are your APIs, for example, that can go back and respond with your firewall, for example. And so again, some of these cross over, right? A lot of these platforms have that functionality. If they don't, we know they don't, and those are things that go into this conversation with the customer. Right? Some customers are like, I don't want any APIs, which would be weird. It's possible, that's fine. Everyone has the right to do their own thing. But we want to know that. Right? We want to know what kind of APIs do you need? Do you need a SOAR platform? Do you need something to automate playbooks and do something shiny? Or are we just going for the checkbox for cyber insurance right now, and we just need something to aggregate our logs? And that's okay too.
But a lot of the EDR, XDR companies, those all have integrations with the underlying security service for logging and everything else, right?
Yes. So we'll go into, all right. SIM as a service is kind of similar. XDR is a little bit later on, a couple slides from now. We'll get there pretty quickly. Of course. That's one of Mike Pereira's favorite conversations. So what Saad asked was, what is the difference between EDR, XDR, MDR, all those things that are very commonly referred to together? The difference between that is between a technology and a managed solution, right? So if you just want an EDR, you just want SentinelOne, you just want CrowdStrike, totally fine. We have vendors that license that, we have vendors that manage just that. When you're looking at more like an MDR, let's say MXDR platform, then you're looking at a solution, somebody else that's gonna manage not just your EDR, they're gonna correlate and manage that with your SIM platform. Do what?
Sentinel one from a level blue or AT&T would be MDR versus Sentinel one would be EDR.
Aha. So Sentinel-1 from AT&T Level Blue would be, there's an MES, which is a Managed Endpoint Security Service of Sentinel-1, that you can have separate from an MTDR, MXDR is what they refer to it now, where it's the Managed SIM Platform and the ES. Right, so it's XDR because
Like, I need you on the
Yeah.
So now, Melanie, I'll tell you what, just knowing the problem is everything's
Absolutely.
stay with, because everything can cross over. What companies are doing is CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike is an endpoint solution. You get it for endpoint.
Yeah,
And now they want to go and do your SOC and SIM. So what's
Exactly.
happening, there's crossover, but for the sake of everybody learning, let's just kind of stick right to.
Yes, it's all kind of incorporated into some of these,
Yeah.
yes.
The
And that's where it
EDR,
gets complicated.
the EDR is the product, the MDR is the management of the product.
Yeah.
Ignore the X, because everyone has an XDR, it's the idea of all the products having the ability to connect into each other
Yeah.
to be able to
It
share.
adds, it also adds the API stuff normally.
And who came up with that? Palo came up with this, and they said, hey, buy all of our products, and we'll connect them all so they can respond back.
Exactly. And so some of those conversations also follow, right? So we're talking about customer vendors that want to do a little bit of everything,
Yeah.
right? Whether they're purchasing and eating other companies or they're correlating with others, right? Everyone wants to start doing all of this stuff, and this is why we're really, really focusing on the foundation pieces, right? We're really focusing on making sure we understand all these technologies, and we understand what the customer needs, because it gets really complicated really fast, and people want to do all of it because they want all the money, because that's trillions of dollars of cybersecurity spend, right? So that's also kind of why we're going piece by piece and kind of looking at the foundation of each of these, and then we'll kind of go from there. So at Protect here, so we have Protect looking more at email security. Everybody needs email security, security awareness training. DLP and DSPM is one of our favorite conversations recently. It has to do with your data. So are you losing data with your posture management, with your data itself? Our main stage tomorrow is going to go really deep into why data is so important. So data is important regardless of what technology you use, but in particular for security, right? Everyone's going after data. So ultimately, with all these things, what they're doing is protecting your data at the end of the day. Going through here, identity, we're looking at vulnerability management, we're identifying what's in our network. We're looking at cyber risk assessment or advisory. How do we have someone help us understand what's in our network, what's not, and then help us build a plan to mitigate that risk. And of course, penetration testing, super fun stuff. There's a million ways to do penetration testing. Almost all vendors do that. So we're also looking at, great, if you do penetration testing, what kind of penetration testing do you do? Where are you allowed to do it in the world? What tools do you use? If you're a highly regulated company, you might not be able to have certain pen testing organizations because they'll use tools and implement technologies for that test that will be a violation of what you have in your policy and procedures, right? So we're gonna ask a lot of questions to make sure we don't get our customers in those kind of holes. Respond, the question of the hour, right? So what are we looking at responding? These are services, right? IR and DFIR are services that people do for you. MDR, XDR, these are services that organizations will do for you. We have some examples below. Again, this is not all inclusive. We're looking at our Vertex, our Lumens, AT&T Level Blue, Bluetooth Alpha, I know it's here at the event as well. MDR, XDR solutions, one or multiple different solutions together. Your teams manage, they are able to see, right, the different pieces of your environment from those different technologies. They have security operators, they have engineers, they have threat hunters, right? They're using all of that data together to give the best picture of where that threat might be. Same thing with DFIR, super, super specific. Again, depending on what kind of breach it is or what kind of thing we're responding to. Different tools, different organizations that do this in different ways. Recover is a big one where we start kind of treading into some network and some cloud conversations, where we look at organizations like 1111, Performant, Rackspace. When we have a disaster, cyber is a disaster, right? There's organizations that get grants because their breaches are so bad, it's considered a disaster for them. A lot of organizations, because of their lack of planning for recovery, will go under, right? It's not just the payment for the ransom, it's because they don't have anything behind it. CrowdStrike, I think, is the best example of that, right? It's a big disaster. What happened with their operating systems, right? Those are the companies that implemented CrowdStrike in that way. if they were not able to recover from that misconfiguration, recover from that bad implementation, millions and billions of dollars were lost because they did not have a plan to recover from something like that.
Delta.
Like and then we have lawsuits because we're the most litigious country in the world, and that's only going to continue to make these conversations a little bit more down those lines. Governed, again, not the most fun thing to talk about, but absolutely needed. We have GRC tools that organizations can say, hey, we already use this tool. Can someone come and help manage it for us? Or hey, we need a GRC tool. We want you to implement it for us. Obviously not us, right? We want a vendor to implement that for us, help us create those policies, help us map these things to what we need. And then maybe like year 2, we'll think about managing it, right? Those are also conversations where implement it, teach us how to do it, and then we'll license it from there. And those are all part of the conversations as well. We have a few minutes per demo. So we're gonna demo, so what Eric's gonna be going through, and I'll do the microphone here in a second. He's new to Max.
Yeah, can you get into this?
Of course.
And this is unscripted, so, ultimately, it's gonna be I'm gonna show you how easy it is, because I haven't done this before. So. Let's start with something that is what I consider basic hygiene. Let's just go quickly look at employee awareness, right? This is, again, 68% of the problems, humans. If you don't have that, you better get that. And so let me see.
So we're going to be looking at our dynamic matrices that are already in Salesforce. So we're continuing to map these. So we're reaching out to a lot of vendors, targeting our Suite 16 right now, and getting those kinds of level of detail. What do you manage as an EDR? What can you license and manage, or license or manage, right? We're getting all that information from our vendors, and we're putting it in here. And so Eric's going to kind of show you when we have it in here, and we're building all this stuff out, how easy it is for anyone to find it. But then also, and this is version 1, right? And we're going to continue development.
Okay, so I can't see this side of the screen, so I can't really see the different solutions. Oh, thank you. See how bad I needed So common solutions is, I guess, the area you hit first, because that's one of our Suite 16 that we're talking about. This will evolve, but everything you saw here is going to be the basis and organization path to our training and everything else. So we're going to keep it kind of more organized in that way, so that it just becomes easier to learn. Because I'll tell you right now, when I couldn't spell security 3 years ago, I really wish I had this type of help and framework that helped me learn this instead of having to learn the way I have to. So this, we feel, is going to enable you to do a lot more self-serve and get a lot of the things that, over the years of, this practice, we start to get more and more of the granular attributes and things like that. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
So common solutions. Gosh. Mapping party. So let's, like I said, let's go with security awareness.
So we have mapped on the right to explain what I'm going to go down here and kind of explain what he's doing along the way too. So he's going to tell you what the use case is. So what we've done, talk about our Suite 16, right? We started to map all of these as what we're referring to as common solutions, right? So I know EDR, right? You don't necessarily have to go super deep into EDR or security awareness training to know whether the customer wants it managed or licensed yet. We just want to get a feel of, I know they're going to want to talk about it. What are some logos, like what are some companies that I might be able to have on top of mind as we start looking at that?
So if you just hit the common category, apparently it just gives the different offers. So if no one has a preference to the brand and specifies that, then you just choose that and you see the different providers that might offer, the common solution. Apparently there's a...
So everybody up there has a security awareness training product.
That's correct.
At this point, you know which brand it is.
That's
And
correct.
it may not matter what brand. Right?
And if that's the only context you have at that point, that should suffice. But sometimes people are kind of predisposed to which solution they want. So, and they tell you which brand you want, and oftentimes that's kind of some of the questions I get from strategists, right? Is who sells no before? So let's see what they have there.
And Eric, isn't it? I mean, I know we always like to get to the
that, like, well, here's the provider, like, I know when I'm doing discovery in ways that I actually understand, like this. I'm like real quick to start looking at vendors, but I think, one thing, while these things are great, I think it's always beneficial to really, we've been talking about all day, get to the solution first. We can worry about vendors all day long later, right? We can have vendors and talk about that. So while this is good, I would encourage people to have a discussion with you first, Emily first, and really outline that. The last thing you need is
Yeah, use those conversation guides, use the questionnaires. We're also editing the questionnaires to make them a little bit more accessible as well. There are some high-level questions. If you don't want to do the high-level question, some detailed ones below it to help you kind of narrow in that conversation more.
Yeah, I think you're gonna talk about the questionnaire or that's pretty much what you're talking about. But ultimately, that's part of the tool sets that she's gonna roll out against all the Sweet 16. We've created actually intake forms specific to that. We have the general one, like if it's just a security conversation, it has all of those general questions, but as you get more, let's call it targeted to maybe what they're looking at. So for example, in this case would be, but here's the providers that provide building work. So now I don't have to go and metadata straight from my OneNote to see who does know before anymore. It's all going to be here, and it's going to be easier and available for everybody to kind of source and have an awareness to who actually provides this stuff. So.
And then the level of detail too, if you want to flip over the show matrix. One of the things that we're doing is we're gathering all this information. It's not a yes or no, right? You do security awareness training, great. Who do you use, right? That's important for some customers, or it's important for us as we're looking at those solutions.
This gets you into more granularity. So for example, if you want to know a little bit more about the company who is providing security awareness training, know before, you can see other things that they also do. And we've captured a lot of this attribution from all of our partners. And again, because context is important, right? So ultimately, we're going to give you the tools to have a broader conversation across more specific tool sets that maybe somebody has predisposition to. So this is it. I mean, you can export this, right? From what I understand.
We're going to be working on it. So we're working on the ability to export these. So kind of as a multi-one, right? I want to compare a couple of these things. We're also working with the team on doing a free text search, right? So you have this open. We know that we're looking at security training in this example, but we also know they want MDR. Those are other questions that we have down here with the details of who does MDR. So we're looking at combining a couple of these things, especially as we're focusing on managed providers, right, that are going to do a couple of things differently. That's the kind of thing you'll be able to quickly search in for, right? We didn't pick super specific on the last one, right? But we can get specific here. So those are some of the things that we're working on to make this a little bit more effective and quick for everyone else to use.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to come down to manage offer or just licenses. It's going to come down to US or you want global. Those type of things are going to be important, and there's searchable criteria in this for you to be able to do that.
Are public providers in these matrices direct with Breakpointe, or are they?
So far, we have the direct for the most part, but we also have our GTS guest here, and I sell a lot of my security things through that because they're security focused and they're kind of like basically revenue share with us.
Antigens go up.
Antigens, so yep.
We have
People
cyber
like
buyers
that.
and new one too, so if they just want licenses,
Or Viridium,
that's okay.
Cyber Buyer. There's so many other.
So if we have someone that like wants to work direct with us, should we just intro to you guys and you can help with maybe onboarding new suppliers or portfolio?
In the past, I would have said no, but now we are for relevant providers, right? And Melanie would be that person that's vetting all the solutions because, you know, she's a lot.
Especially if it's someone that we really need.
Yes, and that's really what this whole thing came up about with, right? Because in the past, our guardrails used to be just managed services. Now people want licenses. And, you know, that's why we don't have those partners. But maybe like Cytera, things like that, and different SIMs, we can get directly from the GTSs of the world, cyber buyers of the world. I think we have Pass 8. We have a bunch of different partners that we didn't have last year, right now. So we can address a lot of different ways of doing things. And, you know, really, again, getting to the outcome, getting to the context. And sometimes the context is, I don't want it managed, right? Even though I might be able to find it embedded in an off-managed offer. They just want the licenses. So then in those cases, it comes to those.
Well, there's discovery forms, stuff like that.
especially discovery.
Right now it's Excel spreadsheets.
Yes. Now, is there a way, this is just between you guys, is there a way for me to log into my own table, go ahead and fill out the customer preference information, it's an internal form,
okay.
and shoots it to you guys as well? Not only for me, but shoots it to you, I'm working on a cybersecurity deal. Here's the further information, ask about compliance, ask about this, the number of employees, everything else, and it shoots it to you automatically. Actually, Enter should build something similar for us, I'll shoot it to you just to see how they did it.
Yeah, that sounds
Because
great.
that might be, just shoots it to you instead of where's the spreadsheet, upload, attach.
I'm also a huge fan of saving things in Salesforce, so you don't have to worry about emailing 10 different things back and
This
forth.
is all over
Huge
here.
fan. Yeah.
And that's, oh, go ahead, please question.
For the company's offers, insurance, they have the same baseline.
No.
They're all different.
Yeah, so the question's about cyber insurance and what they're starting to require. And each cyber insurance company, depending on the organization and the maturity level, require different things. So depending on what kind of policy you want, depending on what your company actually does, the things that you're inherently risky in your own organization. So if you're a super public company, right, that's a little bit different than a mom and pop. That's going to be different with insurance providers. If you're building wood floors, things like that, all those kind of play into it. And insurance is increasingly technical. So the underwriters that are starting to do that kind of work are getting way more technical. So it's no longer checking the box. Hopefully they don't test us, but if we get ransomware, they're not going to pay out, that kind of thing. And a lot of people also need multiple brokers or multiple policies to cover contracts. So we're getting into CMMC this next year, for example. That's going to be a big part of that conversation too. If you want government customers, if you want government contracts, you have to have policies that equal this much. If you're not a mature organization, you can't prove that you're doing continuous testing, things like that, your premiums are going to be huge, absolutely huge. But some of these technologies we're mapping across. So we're doing a really big effort with audit prep organizations, audit bodies themselves that can actually do the auditing, and then how those link into cyber insurance companies. And so that all can help lower premiums for the customers. And then we also have some technologies that partner with cyber insurance companies as well. So you get a lower premium because you have attack IQ, for example, doing continuous monitoring, and then your insurance company tags into that and proves continuous monitoring.
And we actually have MSSPs in the platform that actually specialize in that and are on like Chubb's list and things like that. And you know, I'm not going to mention names, but we do have partners sprouting up like that because the needs are necessitated, and that's what creates the offer, right? No different than I've told you this in the past that Microsoft is just like Teams going to kind of take over a lot of these things based on just licenses, right? So we actually have those very specific Microsoft-centric firms that can really separate when you present it appropriately. So
So complicated,
yeah, it's
right?
very
There's
complicated.
a lot of moving parts, a lot of different organizations.
So I was just gonna chime in on the cyber insurance. So over 22% of cyber insurance claims weren't paid out last year, or a portion of that. So think about the number of breaches. And for a lot of companies, business continuity in their mind is their cyber insurance. So you could almost look at what Melanie put up there where it comes to regulation and compliance and put cyber insurance there for certain companies. Like, well, if your entire business continuity plan is your cyber insurance, have you done all the things required so that the cyber insurance will pay it? And then use that as your check mark to go through, right? And the other reason why it's important never to start with a vendor, if you don't understand their compliance needs and maybe they have CMMC compliance, and you throw out 3 vendors that do MDR and their SOC isn't located in the US, or they have some out of country, it's gonna be egg on your face. So that's where that discovery part's really important first, and then bring it to them.
And we're getting into that, right? We're getting into those details, right? They only do PCI DSS in the US only. That's significant, right? That's a good note that we're gonna have in Salesforce. If they use, we were talking about an example earlier where, yeah, this MDR provider says that they have something integrated in their stack because it looks shiny. When you really dig into it, no, they don't. It's not actually implemented. It's not actually there. So those are also some of the things that we're finding and notifying because I'm a big day 2 person coming from that side of it, and that kind of stuff's really important. So we're a little bit over time, and so we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. One of the last slide here we're gonna do is more trainings, right? So this is a super interesting, I'm super passionate about it. I can talk about it absolutely all day. What we're gonna do is we're gonna start doing training specific to this framework, understanding the different categories or functions that are part of the CSF, how we're looking at that from the Bridgepointe side. And then we're gonna get into focused solutions. So we're gonna talk about each of those different functions of the CSF, how we're looking at it again. every 2 weeks. So starting in January, every 2 weeks, we're gonna have a training that's gonna be recorded. We're talking to Tom about the LMS, it's gonna be beautiful, and we're gonna start getting into focused solutions later on, probably into Q2 at this point. So that we can really dig into, we talk about XDR, we talk about EDR, we talk about all this super shiny acronyms. What does it actually mean, right? So you can go to a training, you can get some quick information on it without having to have Eric around with you.
Don't forget to pay as well too.
Yes.
Yes,
Cyber has
they pay very well,
requirements.
yeah.